record, videotape number 2, time is 3:31.
Doctor, did there come a time when the Specialty's relationship with Lorillard was terminated?
Yes.
And when did that occur?
Sometime in 1956, I believe.
And what were the reasons, as you understood them, that Lorillard terminated the relationship?
Well, competitive filter cigarettes were being manufactured from a tow supplied by Tennessee Eastman Corporation at a much lower price than what would be available to Lorillard from the H&V product.
And is that why Lorillard...
That's my understanding.
All right, and did Lorillard, in fact, switch to the cellulose tow from Tennessee Eastman?
I believe they did.
Excuse me. There's no basis in personal knowledge of this witness.
Did you have an understanding as to who Lorillard turned to supply filter material after he terminated the relationship with Specialties?
It was my understanding it was Tennessee Eastman.
Objection. We just tried an unresponsive call for yes or no answer, and the answer is, again, one without any basis in personal knowledge.
And what product did Tennessee Eastman supply to Lorillard after it terminated the relationship with Specialties?
Same objection.
As you understood it?
Well, it was a suitable tow. More like Lorrillard's competition was using.
Now, Doctor, is there a relationship between the efficiency of a filter on a cigarette and the drawer of a cigarette?
Yes.
And that, what is that relationship?
Well, the higher the efficiency, the greater the draw in general.
When you say the greater the draw, you mean the harder the draw?
The harder the draw.
Okay. And did Lorillard, during the period 52 to 56, when Specialties was manufacturing the filter media, ever express any dissatisfaction regarding the draw of the Kent with the Micronite filter?
I believe there were concerns, but that was due primarily to the non-uniformity of the crepe paper.
And were there any other reasons why the draw, did Lorillard express to you any other, strike that. Lorillard expressed some concerns to Specialties about the draw of the cigarette.
Objection here, sir.
Is that right? Is that what you just said?
Well, some cigarettes, yes.
Okay. And did you address the problem of some cigarettes having a problem with draw and others not? And you being Specialties.
Well, we attributed it to non-uniformity of the crepe paper and changed sources of crepe paper, which corrected the problem.
Were there any other factors that you considered as that might affect this problem of draw?
I don't remember.
Did you ever try to make the filter media less dense by using less asbestos?
Objection to the form. Suggest the answer.
I don't remember specifically.
Okay. Did you ever have a concern about attempting to increase the uniformity of the specific density of the web?
That was of equal concern to the crepe paper, but the crepe paper was more obviously out of control.
Okay. So there are at least a couple of reasons.
Yes.
Now, in addition to the efficiency of the filter affecting the draw, does compression of the filter media affect the draw?
It does.
And what do you mean by compression in that context?
How much is squeezed together would be a visual term.
All right. And in the plug making process, was the filter media supplied by Specialties compressed?
Yes.
a lot or a little?
Well, something in between.
Okay. Now, Dr. Knudson, let me ask you this: in determining the efficiency of these cigarette filters, is the only factor that determines efficiency the quantity of the asbestos?
Objection to the form of the question. It's leading and suggests the answer.
Could you read it back so I could complete
So
it?
long as my objection is preserved, please do so.
Could you read it back?
Question. Now, doctor, let me ask you this. In determining the efficiency of these cigarette filters, is the only factor that determines the efficiency the quantity of the asbestos?
I object to that as a leading question.
Judge, let me say this. Is the only factor in determining the efficiency of this filter the quantity of asbestos in the filter?
Objection
No.
leading.
What other factors affect the efficiency?
Well, compression and the conformation of the crepe paper and the amount of web that's involved in any particular plug.
If one compresses the filter media, one makes it more dense.
That is correct.
Objection to the form is leading.
Now, in your patents, you describe the web as being a loose web. What did you mean by a loose web in the patent?
Perhaps a lofty web.
Now, is the product of a water-based process lofty?
Not in,
Objection to the form.
it is not lofty in comparison to the web.
Is the product of an air-laid process lofty?
Yes.
And again, this web we've been discussing was the product of an air-laid process.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, and loose, as you referred in your patent, does that refer to the density of the web relative to its filtering characteristics?
Object to the form of the question. Not only is it leading, but I think it's confusing.
Okay. Now, well, let me ask you this, Doctor. When you referred to the loose web, did you mean that the components of the web could fall out?
No.
Objection leading.
Suggest the answer.
Did it mean that the components of the filter would be sucked out by someone smoking on the smoking the cigarette?
Objection leading.
No.
Did you mean that by loose that were you referring to the density?
Objection. Please don't cross-examine your witness counsel and suggest answers.
I think, Doctor, you've testified to this, and that's just to respond
And I'd ask an answer.
to that. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this.
Would you repeat the question?
Yeah, could you read it back, please?
Question. Did it mean that the components of a filter would be sucked out by someone smoking a cigarette?
No. Keep going.
Was there an answer to that? Objection leading. The witness, the answer was no. The question, did you mean by loose, were you referring to the density? There's an objection, and there was no answer.
When you referred in your patent to the loose web, what were you referring to?
A lofty web, as contrasted with a paper water-laid product that is much more dense.
Now, Doctor, also referring again to your patents, you state that small diameter fibers can be made from materials such as nylon, cellulose acetate, viscose rayon, and polyester fibers, provided that their diameters are within a specified range. You recall that?
Yes.
Now, each of those is a synthetic fiber, is that correct?
That's correct.
in the period 1952 to 56, were those kinds of synthetic fibers available?
Objection.
They may have been available in experimental quantities, but not commercially.
They were not commercial quantities
That
available?
is correct.
Okay. Now, and if I understood it, what is it about asbestos that made it the critical ingredient in this filter media?
Its diameter.
Now, back again in the period 52, 56, or that's what I'm using as the time frame that Lorillard and Specialties had this relationship. During the period of that relationship, did anyone at Lorillard tell you that Lorillard thought the use of asbestos in the fiber, the use of asbestos in the filter presented a health risk to smokers?
No.
Okay. Did you think that the use of asbestos in a cigarette filter presented a health risk to smokers?
I did not.
Now, Doctor, there are some allegations in this lawsuit that asbestos causes certain diseases. And during the period 1952 to 56, did you think that there was a health risk to smokers by using asbestos in the Kent Micronite filter?
No.
And when you smoked the Kent Micronite filter, were you concerned that there was asbestos in the filter?
I was not.
Did anyone at that time express to you a concern that the asbestos in the Kent Micronite filter posed a hazard to the smokers?
Not that I remember.
And Doctor, when you were working at the Naval Research Laboratory making gas mask filter paper for the Navy, did anyone ever express a concern about us using asbestos in that gas mask filter paper?
Objection asked and answered irrelevant.
No.
And when you were a doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin, did anyone ever express a concern about using asbestos in the Gooch filter?
Objection asked and answered and irrelevant.
No.
Doctor, do you have any personal knowledge that asbestos fibers escaped from the Kent filter while the Kent cigarette was being smoked?
What do you mean by personal experience?
Do you have any knowledge that fibers came out of that filter?
I do not.
Do you have an opinion, sir, with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, whether asbestos fibers escaped from the Kent Micronite filter of the 1952 to 56 vintage while being smoked?
Objection. Before he answers that question, just be hold off the record a second. Not on video, but on stenograph.
We're back on. Time is 3:45.
The answer is no.
The question is, do you have an opinion?
I do.
All right. And what's your opinion?
Same objection.
My opinion is that it does not become airborne and leave the filter.
And what are the reasons for that opinion?
Same objection there. I have a continuing objection to this opinion testimony. Counsel, do I have a continuing objection?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Well, to understand my reason for believing so, you'd have to, again, imagine yourself in the realm of micro dimensions. These are small particles that we're talking about, many of them less than 1 micron. There are molecular forces involved in this area, and once a fiber or a particle impinges on the fiber, it is removed from the airstream, and these molecular forces are rather large in comparison to the energy that's involved in these small particles. As an analogy, I might suggest those of us who wear glasses would have a similar experience. They get cloudy once in a while, and we tend to want to clean them. Do we blow it off? No, we don't blow it off. How do we take it off? We take a tissue or some other cloth-like material and rub rather vigorously. It takes a lot of energy to remove those particles because of the molecular forces. Now, in the small world that we're talking about in this filter, there are similar molecular forces that are very strong with respect to their being able to be swept off and become airborne. That's my opinion.
Now, so a reason for your opinion that the fibers did not come out of the Kent micronite filter is the molecular forces holding them in.
Objection leading.
Please don't characterize his answer, counsel. He's given his answer.
He's a very articulate man, and I think it's really unfair for you to constantly repeat his answers.
Could you read that back, please?
Question. So a reason for your opinion that the fibers did not come out of the Kent micronite filter is the molecular forces holding them in.
Are there any other reasons?
There are other reasons, yes. Moisture is present. The tobacco itself is quite moist, and so there's moisture obviously diffusing into the filter. And water or moisture has a very high surface tension, which means that it requires a lot of energy to break its surface. And so with water present, things tend to be much less airborne. And in addition to that, the first drag that a smoker drags through the filter accumulates large amounts of water vapor, condensed, because one of the combustion products in the burning of a tobacco is water vapor.
Are there any other reasons, Doctor?
I don't recall any other right off.
Okay.
While the filter is compressed, obviously, so that it would be quite a jungle for a tiny little particle to wiggle its way out just to become airborne.
Is it fair to say the very construction of the filter?
It's very unlikely, yes.
I'm sorry?
That would be true. The very construction of the filter.
Now, the molecular forces, each of these submicron fibers has molecular forces.
Yes, they have charged areas. There are electrons, obviously, involved in all molecules. And there are areas on a fiber or of any material where electrons spend more of their time than on the other part. And as a result, they have minute charges, plus and minus charges. And if you want to, it even carries into the magnetic forces, like a magnetic bar. And I don't think you would readily agree that they would dislodge themselves with that kind of force involved.
Doctor, as you sit here today, do you have any reason to believe that the Kent micronite filter with the specialties filter media present a health risk to smokers?
I do not.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions.
I want to make a statement off the video on cigarettes.
We're back on the record. The time is 1:06 on March 22nd.
Good afternoon, Dr. Knudson.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Knudson, for the benefit of the jury, which will ultimately see this tape, I think we should put on the tape what all of us know, but the jury should perhaps have explained to it. It is now Friday afternoon. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
And your direct examination was taken Wednesday afternoon. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And on Thursday, I had the opportunity to ask you questions that were for reasons of the law, not put on videotape. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And there were some additional questions that were also done on stenographic record taken this morning. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That is right.
Now, Doctor, with those ground rules having been explained, until the job that you had before you went to Hollingsworth and Vose was as an employee of the United States government. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And one of your responsibilities for the United States government was supervising the performance of a government contract that was held by Hollingsworth and Vose Corporation. Isn't that right?
I don't quite understand the question.
Hollingsworth and Vose Corporation, during the Second World War, according to your direct testimony, provided certain materials to the government. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And part of your job for the government was to supervise and to act as the government's representative in dealing with Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
I did not supervise. I acted as a government representative.
And in that capacity, you visited Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And when you left the employ of the United States government at or about the end of the Second World War, you went to work for Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And the Hollingsworth and Vose placed you in the position of technical director at that point. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And Hollingsworth and Vose maintained their government contracts for the next 6 years on the same material where you had acted as the government's representative. Isn't that right?
I cannot confirm that it was 6 years. So,
well, according to your direct examination, it was until 1951. Is that your recollection, sir?
Objection. Please do not interrupt the witness's answer. Thank you.
I believe you testified on direct, Dr. Knudson, that it was until 1951. Does that sound approximately correct?
Very approximately.
And coincidentally, in 1951, you were first contacted by Dr. Harris Parmalee, who was an employee of the P. Lorillard Corporation. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And that was the time in which Dr. Parmalee asked you to present a demonstration in the boardroom of P. Lorillard Company for certain senior representatives of that company. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And you performed a test demonstrating how your filter would completely prevent any visible smoke from a cigarette from passing from one glass container to another glass container. Isn't that right?
Approximately, yes.
And the Lorillard personnel were impressed by your test. Isn't that right?
I believe that was true.
And as a result of that, Hollingsworth and Vose was hired to develop a filter for what became the Kent Micronite filter cigarette. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I don't believe they were hired.
There was a business relationship entered into between Lorillard and Hollingsworth and Vose for that purpose. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And to that end, a subsidiary called Specialties was formed, which actually carried out the manufacture of that filter media. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Now, the filter, strike that. If the filter that you designed for a cigarette did not allow the smoke to pass through the filter, no one would want to buy it. Isn't that right?
Objection. What filter?
I did not design the filter.
Did you design the filter media?
I did.
And your purpose in designing the filter media was to make a filter media that would allow smoke to pass through the filter into the smoker's mouth. Isn't that right?
A part of the smoke, yes.
When the filtered media that was used for gas mask was designed to prevent any particulate matter from passing through the filter. Isn't that right?
Substantially.
As much as you could possibly make it so. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Whereas the filter media that you developed and sold to Lorillard was designed with fibers in the filter in a loose, uncompact manner. Isn't that correct?
Objection.
Did you say in the filter?
In the filter media.
Objection.
It was an uncompacted state.
And in your patent, you referred to it as loose. Isn't that right?
That may be true.
Now, the unique part of this filter media was the blue asbestos. Isn't that right?
if you wish to use that term.
And you selected blue asbestos because the diameter was so small. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Because the diameter of the asbestos matched approximately the size of the cigarette smoke particulate matter. Isn't that right?
The diameter of the particulate.
And Lorillard told you that smoke particulate was of a diameter of approximately 1 micron or less. Isn't that right?
Approximately, yes.
They had done testing to determine that, hadn't they?
Objection?
I don't remember that.
Well, Lorillard was the source of your information about the size of the particulate matter. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And the testing they had done had been done with a number of technologies, including an electron microscope. Isn't that correct?
Objection.
I don't know that to be the case.
Did you ever inquire of Lorillard what technology they had used to determine the size of particulate matter?
I don't remember that.
And you testified on direct examination that there was a sense of urgency exerted by Lorillard in order to get this product on the market. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That is correct.
Now, in your direct examination, you also used the expression urgency with respect to your gas mask work for the United States government. Isn't that right?
Objection. He didn't testify on direct with regard to the previous question. He only testified on direct with regard to a sense of urgency for the development of the gas mask filter paper.
Doctor, when you were working for the government, you felt a sense of urgency that appropriate gas mask filters would be provided to our men and women in the armed forces. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And that was designed for their own protection. Isn't that right?
Yes.
The sense of urgency that Lorillard exerted on you in the early 1950s to get the filter media into production was commercial urgency. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That would be right.
The faster it got on the market, the quicker Lorillard could start selling it. Isn't that right?
I'm not qualified to answer that.
Well, the faster that you developed it, the quicker Hollingsworth and Vose would start being paid by Lorillard for that development. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Well, I don't have any reason to support that.
Well, did Hollingsworth and Vose do this work for Lorillard for free, or was it your understanding that they were compensated for it?
Objection.
Object to the unreasonable argument.
I don't know what the arrangement was.
Well, you assumed that they were being paid for it, didn't you, Doctor?
Objection.
I don't know that I assumed that.
Doctor, before you provided the filter media to Lorillard to be placed on the public market, did you or anyone under your control ever test the filter media or the filter to see if parts of the filter were coming off in the tobacco smoke?
Objection.
There were some efforts to make that determination.
There were efforts made before the cigarette was sold to the public or after the cigarette was sold to the public?
I can't remember that.
Well, what year was it that this testing was done, Doctor?
I don't remember.
Objection.
Who was it who did the testing, Doctor? And perhaps I can help you with the year.
Objection. Is that a question?
Yes,
or is
sir.
that a suggestion?
That's a question. Who did the testing, Doctor?
Well, in view of the fact that there were several people in several periods, I can't quite answer.
What was the earliest testing that was done? Who did the earliest testing that was done on the Kent Micronite filter to see whether portions of the filter were coming off in the cigarette smoke?
A member of my staff.
Is that Peter Braymeyer?
Not necessarily.
Well, would it reference the letters that you have previously seen signed by Peter Braymeyer on this subject?
Objection. I just, could you ask a little more comprehensible question, please?
I'll do my best, counsel. Doctor, would you please look at P1A, the very first deposition exhibit.
Yes.
P1A is a letter dated June 4th, 1954 on H&B Specialties letterhead. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You recognize that letterhead, don't you?
I recognize what I see here.
Well, what is it?
It's a letter.
Signed by who?
Peter Bremeyer.
Does it in its last paragraph discuss the search for asbestos in the smoke of Kent cigarettes?
It would appear so, yes.
What's the date of the letter?
June 4th, 1954.
Prior to June 4th, 1954, do you have any evidence that anyone ever tested the smoke of Kent cigarettes for asbestos fiber?
I don't have any evidence, no. That isn't to say that I don't believe that they were.
Oh, you believe they were tested by someone else?
I believe it could be. True.
Well, doctor, in June 1954, the Kent cigarettes had been on the market for at least 2 years. Does that comport with your memory, sir?
I don't know the date of introduction, but that's approximately correct.
Now, let's talk about Peter Bremeyer for a second, Dr. Knudson. Peter Bremeyer was your assistant for a period of approximately 5 years at Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that correct?
Objection. Could we go off the record just for a moment?
Off the record.
We're back on the record. Time is 1:22.
Question, please.
Could the reporter please read back the question?
Question now, let's talk about Peter Bremeyer for a second, Dr. Knudson. Peter Bremeyer was your assistant for a period of approximately 5 years at Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
He reported directly to you.
Yes.
He reported to no one else.
In my absence, he may have reported to somebody else.
But when you were present, he reported only to you.
That's correct.
He held the title of Assistant Technical Director.
Yes.
And you received routinely copies of his outgoing correspondence. Isn't that right?
I don't have that exact memory.
Would it be normal for you to receive copies from the secretary of his outgoing correspondence?
I believe that's true.
And would it be normal for him to report to you on any projects that he was working on?
I would believe that's true.
Look at the bottom of P1A, Doctor. Is that Peter Bremeyer's signature?
Objection.
I can't certify to that.
Well, Doctor, the man worked for you for 5 years. You got copies of his correspondence. He reported only to you. You were his supervisor. Are you telling the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you don't recognize his signature?
Objection. Argumentative, counsel.
This being some 40 years prior to this date, I can't certify that signature.
Well, Doctor, does it appear to you to be anybody else's signature? For example, Mr. Bremeyer's secretary?
I have no opinion on that.
And would you look at the signature on P1B and P1C and P1D?
It's clear that I don't have to.
Yes?
Those are all documents that appear to be signed by one Peter Bremeyer. Isn't that right, sir?
Objection.
It would appear so.
All of them signed as Peter Bremeyer, Assistant Technical Director of H&B Specialties Company, Inc. Isn't that correct?
Objection.
It would so appear.
All on H&B Specialties Company, Inc. letterhead. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
All of them directed toward Specialty's largest client, P. Lorillard Company, in the person of Dr. Parmalee. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Is that Peter Bremeyer's signature on those 4 documents?
Objection. Is there a reason why you're asking this again?
You can bet on it.
Is there a good reason?
After an elapse of some 40 years, I cannot certify that that's Peter Braymire's signature.
Please take a look at the last paragraph of Plaintiff's Exhibit 1A, Doctor, which is the first of those series of documents. This document was shown to you by counsel for Hollingsworth and Vose in preparation for your direct testimony. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure.
Doctor.
I'm not sure that I was given this document.
Doctor, I will represent to you that during your deposition testimony yesterday, you indicated that that is one of the documents that you had seen by counsel for Hollingsworth and Vose.
Objection.
Does that statement by me refresh your recollection of whether or not you in fact saw it?
Objection. That's improper, as you know, counsel. There's a... Yikes.
Well, what I said yesterday, I may have misspoken. It very well could be Braymire's signature, but I can't certify to that.
Doctor, did you read this document before you began your direct testimony on Wednesday?
Probably true, but I can't specifically remember.
Well, at page 55 of your deposition on Thursday, with reference to this document, the question was asked, is this one of the two letters you alluded to earlier that you were shown? And your answer was yes. Next question, and when were you most recently shown this letter? Answer, last Thursday or Friday. Was your testimony inaccurate on yesterday when you gave it?
I'll stand by that.
Objection.
Doctor, in this letter, Peter Braymire advises your client, P. Lorillard, that he has been unable to detect asbestos in the smoke of Kent cigarettes, probably due to inadequate microscopic technique. Isn't that what Mr. Braymire says?
It reads to that effect, yes.
Can you tell us what instructions you gave Peter Braymire to look for asbestos in the smoke of Kent cigarettes in 1954?
I do not have that memory.
Peter Braymire never had an electron microscope, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And an electron microscope is a superior instrument for detecting the presence of asbestos than a light microscope. Isn't that true, Doctor?
More sensitive, yes.
Can look at things with higher magnification. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Now, Doctor, in December of that same year, 1954, off the record. Back on the video, please.
We're back on the record. Time is 1:31.
Doctor, at the time that this letter by Mr. Braymire was written, the cigarettes had been on the market for 2 years. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Which letter are you referring to now?
The letter that you just were looking at, June 4th, 1954.
That would be approximately correct.
In fact, the cigarettes were introduced at a press conference held in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Isn't that right, Doctor?
According to my memory, that's correct.
And you were present at that meeting, isn't that right?
That is correct.
And that introduction was the culmination of the urgent development program to produce a filter for this new cigarette. Isn't that right?
Objection. Beyond the scope.
Depends on what you mean by culmination.
Well, you now had a commercial product. Isn't that right?
Yes.
That you could sell to the public. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Lorillard did.
Well, one of your functions at H&V was to stay in contact with Dr. Harris Parmalee at Lorillard. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You were the person at H&V or Specialties, either one of those two companies, who had the most contact with Dr. Parmalee at Lorillard. Isn't that right?
I would think it might be true.
And you spoke to him at least weekly. Isn't that right?
Approximately.
And the vast majority of your conversations concerned the Micronite filter and Kent cigarettes. Isn't that right?
Well, the filter material, perhaps.
And didn't Dr. Parmalee tell you in early 1954 that they had had the Kent filter tested by 2 different electron microscopists, and they had found that asbestos mineral fiber was coming out in the smoke?
I don't have any memory of 2 microscopists. I have memory only of 1.
You have an exhibit in front of you, Doctor, that is dated June 15th, 1953, Doctor, off video.
Back on the record, time is 1:37.
Doctor, I withdraw my previous question because I misspoke. You've been presented with exhibit number 7 that was previously marked. Doctor, that's a letter from Dr. Parmalee to the president of P. Lorillard Company. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That appears to be correct.
And that is what is the date on that letter?
April 26, 1954.
And in that letter, Dr. Parmalee describes the findings of a Dr. Fulham. Isn't that right?
I don't see any record of any findings here.
Well, what is the first sentence of that letter, Dr. Knudson?
As you know, Dr. Fuller of Schenectady, New York, recently examined Kent smoke and confirmed Mrs. Revere's earlier observation, namely that such smoke contained traces of mineral fiber.
Well, Dr. Knudson, did Dr. Parmalee at Lorillard tell you about that confirmation by Dr. Fulham?
I don't remember even receiving a copy of this letter.
Well, I'm not asking you whether you received the letter. I'm asking whether Dr. Parmalee discussed that subject with you.
I don't remember this, sir.
Did Dr. Parmalee ever discuss with you the findings of Mrs. Revere, which are alluded to in that letter?
No.
As you sit here today, do you know that Dr. Fulham is and was an electron microscopist?
Objection.
I don't know that he still is, but he certainly was.
As you sit here today, do you know that Mrs. Revere was an electron microscopist?
I don't know that person.
Did you ever ask to receive copies of Dr. Fulham's report from Dr. Parmalee?
I wasn't aware that Mrs. Fulham, or Mrs. whatever her name is, Mrs. Revere, I don't know anything about the work that she did. I never heard reference to it.
Well, Doctor, did you ever request a copy of any reports from Lorillard on the subject of asbestos fiber leaking through in the smoke of Kent cigarettes?
I didn't make the request.
Were you sent some?
Yes.
Were you sent reports other than what you've been shown at this deposition?
Objection.
Not that I remember, sir.
Doctor, weren't the findings of Dr. Fulham and Mrs. Revere the reason why you had Peter Braemeier doing the experiments that he did?
I would like to only to refer to Dr. Fulham's work. That's the only one that I recognize of having seen at that time.
All right. Let me change the question then. Isn't it a fact that the reason why you had Peter Braemeier doing experiments to detect the presence of asbestos in cigarette smoke because you had been told by Lorillard that Dr. Fulham had found asbestos in Kent cigarette smoke?
Objection.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Was it a matter of concern to you that there was asbestos mineral fiber in the smoke of the Kent cigarettes, or at least that Dr. Fulham had thought there was?
Objection.
I don't remember the scene of this operation at all, so I can't really confirm that.
You don't have any recollection as you sit here today of that matter being of concern to you. Is that correct?
Objection.
As I sit here today, I don't have a recollection of it.
Now, in December of 1984, Dr. Parmalee wrote to you and told you that they had been sending experimental Kent cigarettes to Dr. Fulham to test to see if they could reduce the presence of asbestos in the smoke. Isn't that correct?
You'll have to get the document first.
Sure, it is P10, I believe. Pardon me, P9, Doctor. Do you have that document?
I do have it.
And that's a document, that's a letter from you, pardon me, excuse me, it's not a letter from you. It's a letter to you from Dr. Parmalee at Lorillard, isn't that right?
That is correct.
And it's dated December 1st, 1954, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And it refers to a report from Dr. Ernest Fulham, an electron microscopist, isn't that right?
It refers to such a report, yes.
And it refers to him having performed experiments on 18 samples of experimental Kent cigarettes, isn't that right?
Do you mean filters or cigarettes?
I believe it says cigarettes.
All right.
Is that true?
Well, I'm looking. Yes, it does say cigarettes.
And the purpose of the filter was the purpose of the experiment was to detect the relative levels of asbestos that pass through in the smoke. Isn't that right?
I don't find that so stated.
Well, with the table that is presented as an attachment to this document lists a description of certain samples, a sample number, and the number of fields examined in order to find one particle of asbestos. Isn't that right?
Objection.
It's my understanding that that's correct.
And the smaller the number, the more common asbestos was found in a particular sample. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I'm not familiar with Dr. Fulham's technique, so I can't really confirm that from any knowledge.
Off the record.
No, I don't agree with off the record.
Fine. I assume we're still on video? Good. Doctor, wasn't the purpose of this experiment to reduce the amount of asbestos that was passing through Kent cigarettes in the filter?
Objection. Counsel, as you pointed out in two of your previous questions, but for some reason not in this one, the document you're examining on relates to experimental Kent cigarettes. I assume you're not trying to confuse the witness by dropping that out of this question.
I am
also object,
certainly
of course,
not.
to the relevance of the inquiry regarding the experimental cigarettes.
Doctor, the purpose of having Dr. Fulham conduct experiments on experimental cigarettes was to reduce the amount of asbestos fiber in the Kent smoke that was being sold to the public. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I don't have the feeling that the asbestos was passing through the filter, so that isn't technically correct.
Doctor, I've just had marked a document that I wish to have marked as P13, and if one of the other attorneys would be kind enough to walk up with the document. Mr. Shackman, could you assist me? Thank you. Please read the document, Doctor.
Out loud?
Please read the document to yourself.
Oh. Yes.
Doctor, that is a letter from Dr. Parmalee of Lorillard to Dr. Fulham. Isn't that so?
Objection.
It would appear so.
What's the date on the letter?
July 20th, 1954.
Does the letter reference a transmittal of experimental Kent cigarettes to Dr. Fulham?
It does.
Would you please read into the record the last paragraph of that letter?
Can I have a continuing objection to examination of the letter? Thank you.
We will appreciate very much if you will observe the relative amounts of mineral fiber in the smoke from these 4 lots, following the same general techniques which you used in the investigation prior to this. We hope that the results of your examination will disclose that we are on the right track. We are very anxious to have the smoke from our cigarette as free from mineral fiber as possible, at least as free, as pure as the air which we normally breathe. This current assignment is not quite as comprehensive as the first one, and we trust that you will find time to get at it quite promptly. If you have any thoughts along the line with which we are concerned, please feel free to so indicate.
Doctor, I am going to show you 3 additional letters from Dr. Parmalee to Dr. Fulham, which are marked P14, P15, and P16, and I'm going to request that we go off video so that you can look at them, and I will question you about all 4 of them at that point. Off video, please.
No.
Off video.
I'm going to insist that we go off the video just because in the last document that was handed to the witness, the 4 lawyers had to read that same document, and it took them 5 minutes before the witness ever got it.
A, it did not take 5 minutes, and B, it wouldn't have taken any time if we'd been shown the normal courtesy of having a copy supplied to us. There was certainly nothing unusual about counsel seeing an exhibit before a witness is allowed to testify about it.
I will read
Was that the courtesy that was shown to the other parties on the direct examination?
I trust it was. I don't know.
Your trust is misplaced.
Was this some sort of revenge? Is that why you're holding things up?
Counsel?
Wait, stop. Mr. Poole was not here for the direct, as you know, Mr. Shackman. You are mischaracterizing what occurred. There were 3 exhibits. They were pre-marked. They were shown to counsel before the video direct even began. And I resent you trying to take advantage of Mr. Poole since you know he wasn't here.
He wasn't here, and it's not true that copies were given to everyone.
No, but you were shown, they were pre-marked, and you were shown in advance what those exhibits were.
Well, I
Mr.
asked...
Poole doesn't know what these exhibits are?
Well, I think you're interjecting yourself, sir. I asked both yesterday and today simply to avoid, not as a matter of right or courtesy or anything, simply to avoid delay, that I be furnished with copies. Mr. Johnson said he would give them to me, just not because I had any right to, but so we would move more quickly. Now, I haven't gotten them, so we're not moving quickly, and I don't think it's appropriate for you to complain that we're not moving quickly because we have to stop and look at exhibits that I personally have not seen, or not seen recently, while they're being shown to a witness. I certainly have a right to see the exhibit before it's shown to a witness. I think you must agree to that.
Mr. Poole,
And I don't think you would exaggerate how long it takes me to read it either.
Mr. Poole, if we were in a law office, we'd give you the courtesy of making a copy. You don't have free access to a copy machine.
I'd suggest that if we were in Judge Newcomer's courtroom, he would make you give us copies, not to delay the trial.
Well, the matter is being delayed at the moment, and I will ask that the video be spliced so that all this chest beating by various attorneys would be eliminated so that the jury can deal with the issues in this case, which are this witness's testimony. And I take it, counsel, that you still decline to allow the video to be turned on just for the sake of wasting tape.
That's not why I declined.
Note that it is my practice, that is my understanding of the practice in Philadelphia County, that the tape is turned off during periods of time like this, and the only reason it is not is because the court reporting office has been retained by counsel for Lorillard and H&B.
That's not the practice under the federal rules.
I move to strike all the column pages from the evidence.
He's just wandering around the fucking wilderness. Johnson. Witnesses all damn. I think it's his letters in a way, don't you know what I'm saying? It just doesn't have shit to do with how they were questions. Yeah, what their shit is. All that is something that tells you it's important shit in the stuff. It's just, he hasn't really touched me. I don't think it's true. Take a look. That's the answer for one of the letters. We can easily show you this is going to help you turn around and you try to hear about these problems. So he's probably, this was the purpose of this. Oh, I see. I mean, he's just kind of wrong line there. I was going to make the arrow. He never received anything from the forms tested, anything of the level. Most of the terms were stuck on that. Well, he didn't get copies of us. No, we don't.
Doctor, could you please put P14 in front of yourself? What's the date of P14?
October 11, 1954.
And what's the date on P15?
October 27, 1954.
And what's the date on P16?
November 23rd, 1954.
Each of those letters appears to be letters from Dr. Parmalee of Lorillard to Dr. Fulham, the electron microscopist. Isn't that right?
Objection. Counsel, may I ask you to ask the predicate question whether the witness has ever seen these documents before?
Fine. Fine. Have you ever seen these 3 documents before?
I have not.
Fine. Each of them appears to be a letter from Dr. Parmalee to Dr. Fulham, the electron microscopist. Isn't that right?
Objection.
It so appears.
And in P14, experimental cigarettes are being sent to Dr. Fulham for the purpose of determining whether mineral fiber can be reduced from passing out in the smoke. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Object to the point.
May I have a continuing objection to the examination of the documents as well? Thank you.
That would appear to be the objective.
And P15 is a further batch of experimental Kent cigarettes that Dr. Fulham is being asked to test for the purpose of reducing the amount of mineral fiber in the cigarettes. Isn't that right?
Objection. P15 cannot be cigarettes. You said P15 is a batch of cigarettes.
I apologize if I misspoke. Dr. Knudson, I'm sure you understood what I meant, but I'll make it clear to you. Dr. Knudson, isn't P15 a ledger which refers to the shipment of experimental cigarettes to be tested by Dr. Fulham for the purpose of reducing the passage of mineral fiber through the filter?
The word experimental Kent cigarettes is not used. Just Kent cigarettes.
Fine. Would you read the sentence in which that appears?
Under separate cover, we are sending you 6 more lots of Kent cigarettes, numbered 13 through 18 inclusive.
Go on.
Again, each lot represents a different treatment for the purpose of eliminating the occurrence of mineral fibers in the smoke.
And Doctor, P16 is yet another letter to Dr. Fulham concerning treated cigarettes. Isn't that right?
Well, it doesn't quite say that, but you might infer it.
What does it say on that subject?
We wish to thank you very much for your letter of November 21st and for the interesting report of your latest work with which was enclosed with your letter.
And a week later, you get a letter from Dr. Parmalee enclosing a table of Dr. Fulham's work looking for asbestos in the smoke of experimental cigarettes. Isn't that right?
I'll have to look. Approximately, yes.
Well, Dr. Knudson, isn't it a fact that during this portion of 1984, during this portion of 1954, Dr. Parmalee was telling you exactly what he was doing with Dr. Fulham?
Objection.
I had not had any information concerning these previous samples. This was the first document that I ever saw having to do with this subject.
I'm not asking you whether you saw a previous document, Dr. Knudson. I'm asking you that during the process that Dr. Parmalee was following of sending cigarettes out to Dr. Fulham for the purpose of checking the passage of asbestos mineral fiber through the filter, whether he kept you advised of what he was doing.
Objection.
I did not. I don't remember that I was ever kept fully advised at all of his various samples that he makes reference in these earlier letters.
Did you know that Dr. Fulham was engaged in an ongoing program at the behest of Lorillard to find a way to reduce the presence of asbestos fiber in the smoke of Kent cigarettes?
Objection.
I don't remember that.
Doctor, when Dr. Parmalee wrote to you in December of 1954, didn't you write back? And isn't that in front of you as Exhibit 8?
This is to acknowledge the letter of December 1st, which was the one that you're talking about.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
In the last paragraph of your letter of December 3rd, the first sentence states, the other two letters pertain to the problem of anchoring asbestos in the present Micronite furnace. Is that what you said in the last paragraph of your letter of December 3rd, 1954?
That's what is in this paragraph. Yes.
And this letter is signed by you. Isn't that correct, Doctor?
That is correct.
And it was sent by you to Dr. Parmalee. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And the words, the problem of anchoring the asbestos in the present Micronite furnace, are your words. Isn't that right, Doctor?
That is correct.
When was the first time you knew that this was a problem?
I can't answer that question. I don't have a time.
Object, Counsel, you're not trying to mischaracterize the letter, are you? And to be sure,
you can count on the fact that I will not try to mischaracterize any exhibit in this case, Counsel.
Oh, thank you. The sentence reads, the other two letters pertain to the problem of anchoring the asbestos in the present Micronite furnace.
That's what the sentence says.
Thank you.
Doctor, by December of 1954, there was a situation that you characterized as a problem of anchoring asbestos in the Micronite filter. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I don't know that I'd characterize it as a problem because I didn't recognize that there was any mineral fiber being airborne through the filter.
Well, do you use the words, quote, the problem, unquote, in your letter?
Objection.
It reads that way, yes.
You certainly wouldn't have said that if you didn't believe there was a problem, would you?
Objection.
Well, I can't remember the exact circumstances why I would use that term.
Well, you would.
I don't remember the problem. That's what I'm telling you.
Well, let's look, with respect to that problem, can you tell me if you can remember anything you did between 1954 and the end of Micronite asbestos being used in the filter to solve the problem?
Objection.
I can tell you that we prepared experimental material with a view of reducing the price. That was the main issue that was at hand.
You prepared experimental product for the purpose of eliminating the asbestos. Isn't that correct?
Objection.
The purpose was to submit samples that would be satisfactory to Lorillard, recognizing that there was competition in the field that was supplying a tow for cigarette filters that was very cheap.
Well, by 1954, Doctor, isn't it a fact that you were planning on eliminating the asbestos from the filter?
I don't know that I was planning on it. I think maybe Lorillard was.
And you were trying to find some colored substitute that would look like the same filter material that had been in the Kent cigarette. Isn't that right?
I believe that's true.
In fact, the sentence that you have on that subject in your letter of December 3rd, 1954 is, in view of the contemplated elimination of asbestos, we did not wish to go into any detailed analysis of Dr. Fulham's findings at this time. And then there's a sentence where you criticize Dr. Fulham.
Yeah, read that, please.
Oh, certainly. It does seem obvious that his test results make little sense.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you, as a scientist, then take any steps to determine whether Dr. Fulham was right or whether he was wrong?
I did not. We were in danger of losing our business because of price, and that was the emphasis that we were working toward.
If the next sentence in your letter was, so that the fact that asbestos may have been coming through the filter in the 2.5 years that the product had been on the market was only a concern to you to the extent that that the product was more expensive?
Objection.
No, that's not true.
Explain why it's not true, Doctor.
Objection.
I didn't believe that there was asbestos sloughing off in the filter.
Well, obviously Dr. Fulham did.
Counsel, don't interrupt the witness and don't shout at the witness.
I am
Please
absolutely not
ask
shouting
questions.
at the witness.
You just did.
He talks to everyone.
I beg your pardon?
He talks to everyone.
He shouldn't shout at the witness.
I
don't care how he talks
apologize,
to other
Doctor,
people.
if you feel I've shouted at you, and I will try absolutely not to do that.
I beg of you to share with me my concern. After all of these years, I don't remember all of the details that you make reference to. It's impossible to put them in focus.
Thank you, Doctor. But to return to my question, Dr. Fulham appeared to believe that asbestos was coming out in the Kent smoke. Isn't that right?
Objection.
It would so appear.
And from the letter that I showed you from Dr. Parmalee to the president of Lorillard Corporation, it appeared that Dr. Fulham was confirming the results of another investigator, Dr. Revere.
Objection.
Doesn't that appear from that document?
It would so appear, but I didn't know any of that.
And from that, Dr. Parmalee determined to embark upon a program to eliminate asbestos from Kent smoke, which is why he was sending these experimental cigarettes to Dr. Fulham. Isn't that what appears from these documents?
I don't know what he did. I wasn't privileged to know about that.
You mean Dr. Parmalee didn't tell you that he had this program with Dr. Fulham to eliminate the asbestos from the filter?
I did not know that.
Eliminate from the smoke.
Objection.
I did not know that until I got Dr. Parmalee's letter, which showed the results that Dr. Fulham reported.
Well, obviously, Dr. Parmalee believed that there was asbestos in the smoke. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I don't know what
Counsel,
Dr. Parmalee believed.
Did you ever discuss what Dr. Parmalee believed on that subject with Dr. Parmalee?
I don't remember the details of such a discussion.
Does that mean you had a discussion, but you don't recall?
I don't recall.
Why was a colored substitute important for when the asbestos was removed, according to your letter, Dr. Knudson?
I don't know the reason.
Well, wouldn't it be logical that you would want it to be the same color as the previous filter so that the consumer would not notice a difference?
You're asking me if I know why Lorillard wanted a different color, and I don't know that.
Well, I'm asking why you used the expression colored substitute for the asbestos in your letter.
Objection. I don't think I understand the question.
Objection.
Can you answer my question, Doctor?
Well, I really don't fully understand it.
I'll withdraw it and ask a different question. In your letter to Dr. Parmalee, you state If you desire, we will go into this problem in greater detail after the present program of deciding on a colored substitute for the asbestos has been solved. Isn't that what you said, Doctor, in your letter?
That's what was said.
And this problem refers to the problem of anchoring asbestos in the micronite. Isn't that what you meant?
I can't be sure that that was what was, after all these years. How can I remember that?
Doctor, this letter that you wrote, we've been talking about one paragraph of that letter. Isn't that right?
I beg your pardon?
You're talking about P8?
I'm talking about P8 and the last paragraph. Do you see what I'm directing you to?
Yes.
Now, in that letter, the word problem appears in the first sentence, correct?
It does.
And the words that follow the word problem is problem of anchoring the asbestos in the present micronite furnace. Isn't that what appears in the letter you wrote?
Exactly.
Now, in that same paragraph, the word problem appears in one other place, further in the paragraph. Isn't that right?
If you're referring to the colored substitute, yes.
The sentence in which it appears is, if you desire, we will go into this problem in greater detail after the present program of deciding on a colored substitute for the asbestos has been solved. Isn't that what you said, Doctor?
Yes.
The problem that you intended to go into greater detail after the colored substitute issue was solved was the problem of anchoring the asbestos. Isn't that so, Doctor?
Objection.
It's out of context. I can't remember what my thoughts were on that matter.
Well, can you think of any other problem that is alluded to in the bottom part of that paragraph other than the problem of anchoring the asbestos, Doctor?
I'm not in the position to speculate, sir.
Well, certainly, Doctor, the question of cost nowhere appears in that paragraph. Isn't that right?
I believe that's correct.
There's no reference to a problem of cost, is there?
That was the main motivation that I would remember.
But that doesn't appear in that paragraph.
It does not appear in that paragraph.
And the substitute that you were providing, I'll strike that. The sample that you were going to be sending to Lorillard was a sample that is described as one in which the asbestos has been removed. Isn't that right?
Where are you referring, counsel? Counsel, could you just direct me to the...
Let me rephrase it, Doctor, and perhaps make it clearer. In that paragraph, you state that you are engaged in a program of deciding on a colored substitute for the asbestos. Isn't that right?
Those words occur in the bottom of that paragraph, yes.
And you wrote them?
I would have to say yes.
Well, did you ever solve that problem?
Objection.
I can't be sure whether we did or not. It wasn't adopted, but I don't know that we didn't solve the problem.
So you never found a substitute for the asbestos?
I don't believe so.
And so, from that point on until the end of the Kent Micronite blue asbestos cigarette, let me strike that, ask it a different way. From that point until mid-1956, when Kent stopped production, asbestos remained in Kent cigarettes. Isn't that right?
I believe that to be the case, but I'm very vague.
And there were no changes in design made from December of 1954 until the cigarette was ultimately replaced by a new cigarette by Lorillard. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Not that I remember.
And can you cite to me any research that was done from this date until mid-1956 that solved the problem of anchoring the asbestos?
Objection.
I can't cite anything, no. That isn't to say that nothing was done.
But you don't know of any.
I don't remember.
And
Counsel, is this... Excuse me.
prior to, by this point, 2 years or more into commercial production, literally billions of Kent cigarettes had been sold.
Objection.
You knew that, Doctor, didn't you?
I didn't know that as a fact, no. I know many cigarettes had been sold. I don't know how many billions.
Well, Doctor, wasn't the fact that this asbestos fiber was coming through the filter in 1954, according to Dr. Fulham, a concern to you?
Objection.
I can't tell you yes or I can't tell you no.
Well, Doctor...
I just can't remember all those details.
Doctor, I will represent to you that in Kent's advertising, they described micronite as a substance which was harmless, safe, and dust-free. And this morning, when I asked you about those adjectives to describe the micronite substance, you told me that you thought that those were appropriate terms. Isn't that right?
That is right.
Do you still believe that today?
I certainly do.
You believe that blue asbestos is harmless?
I didn't say that.
Is it?
Objection.
Under certain circumstances, it might be.
Might be harmless or might be harmful, Doctor?
Might be harmful.
Would you describe blue asbestos as safe?
Objection.
Safe for what?
Safe to be put in a process by which it might be breathed into the human lung.
If it were breathed into the human lung, I would express concern.
Would you consider it dangerous, Doctor?
Objection.
I don't know. You can't invent a situation that would clearly express my understanding.
Would you consider blue asbestos to be dust-free?
Objection.
Under certain situations, yes.
And under certain situations, it would not be. Isn't that right, Doctor?
That could possibly be.
Isn't it fair to say, Doctor, that by December of 1954, you didn't know in your own mind whether the asbestos was getting out of the filter or not?
Objection.
I didn't have any experimental data to prove it, but I certainly did not believe it.
Well, but you knew that other scientists who had been engaged by Lorillard did believe it. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I don't believe I'll answer that question because I didn't know anything about the technique of the sample preparation or anything else. There's lots of asbestos floating around in the atmosphere, and whether or not it came from certain places, I can't speculate.
And by that point in 1954, you knew about the disease entity asbestosis, didn't you, Doctor?
Objection.
I can't tell you when I first learned about that.
Well, Doctor, you were deposed about 5 years ago in other litigation. Isn't that right, Doctor?
There was a previous deposition.
And, Doctor, would you pass that on to the witness, please, counsel?
Oh, I thought you were coming to me.
Doctor, you testified in 1985 as a representative of Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Would you look to cover, Doctor?
That is correct.
And if you'd look at page 74 to 75. Doctor, in the bottom half of that page, were you not asked this question and did you not give this answer? Did you consider that asbestos dust was very harmful? Is that the way you would have characterized it in 52 to 54? It was a matter of concern. I don't know whether I would say very hazardous under the conditions I was aware of. Question, did you know that asbestos dust could be very harmful? Answer, I knew it could lead to asbestosis with, you know, exposures much different than what we were experiencing. Doctor, those were answers given by you under oath, isn't that right?
That is correct.
So at least at that time, when you gave that testimony, you testified that by 1954 you were aware of the disease entity asbestosis. Isn't that so?
Objection.
It would so appear.
Doctor, if you were aware of the disease entity asbestosis in 1954, and if you were aware that Dr. Fulham, who had been hired by Lorillard, found asbestos fiber in the smoke from Kent cigarettes, wouldn't that present a major health concern in your mind?
Objection.
Except for the fact I wasn't convinced that his technique or his report represented a cigarette that I was familiar with.
Well, doctor, tell me exactly what you did to find out whether he was right or whether he was wrong after December 1954.
I've testified before that I didn't do anything.
But you kept selling asbestos filter media but you kept selling asbestos-containing filter media to Lorillard for the next 18 months. Isn't that right?
I didn't sell it. The company did.
Doctor, by the way, speaking of the company, at the time that these incidents were occurring in 1954, you were the director of research for Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
In 54, I think I was still technical director.
All right. But you went on to become research director, isn't that right?
That is correct.
And then you went on to become the vice president of Hollingsworth and Vose.
Objection.
In charge of research, yes.
And then you went on to become a director of Hollingsworth and Vose.
That's correct.
And you finished out your professional career at Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And you're a stockholder of Hollingsworth and Vose.
A very minor one, yes.
And the pension on which you now support yourself is a result of your work at Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I receive a pension, yes.
You receive it from Hollingsworth and Vose?
Yes.
And, Doctor, isn't it a fact that when you testified in 1985 in the deposition that we've just alluded to, you were speaking as a representative of Hollingsworth and Vose?
Objection.
That's not true.
Look at the cover of the deposition that's in front of you.
Counsel, you're not asking the witness to draw a legal conclusion, I hope.
No, I'm asking him to read what the cover says.
And for what purpose?
To establish that, in fact, he was testifying as a company representative in 1985 when he testified. If you wish to stipulate to that,
Counsel, don't you have a slight hearsay problem?
I think we could ask the court to take judicial notice that he was testifying in that capacity in that case.
Either he is or he isn't.
That's right. He is or he isn't. There's no sense in badgering him about it.
Fine. I'll ask him in a slightly different way. Doctor, was it your understanding in 1985 that you testified as a company representative?
That is true.
Thank you, Doctor. And,
Counsel,
Doctor...
is this a good opportunity to take a break in your examination? It's now 2:26.
I'm perfectly happy to continue.
I would like to take a break.
Okay with me.
Okay.
Under our local rules, no counsel may consult with the witness while he's on cross. Is that agreed?
That's agreed. You represent that's a local rule. That's fine.
It's a judge-by-judge rule. Some believe in it, some don't. I personally believe in it, as a matter of fact.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poole. May we go off video?
It's a strong custom.
Well, some judges look at some judges say, of course you can do it.
Some judges.
Are we on or off?
Really, no, it's just...
You guys want to go off video? You want to stay off?
We're back on the record. Time is 2:40.
Doctor, we've just taken a break for a moment, so I'd like to shift gears for a second. The filter media was made by Hollingsworth and Vose's subsidiary Specialties at two plants, one in West Groton, Massachusetts, and the other in Commonwealth, Massachusetts. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And at the two plants, the process was was basically the same. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And you were in those plants on at least a weekly basis. Isn't that right?
Approximately correct.
Now, in that plant, didn't you testify this morning, by the plant I mean West Groton, that except for 1 hour a day, there was no visible dust generated by that process?
Objection.
Quote it again, please.
Well, let me phrase it slightly differently. From your knowledge of the way the process was done at West Groton, wouldn't it be fair to say that there was only visible dust generated by that process for about 1 hour a day?
Objection.
I believe I said 1 to 2 hours a day, depending upon how many shifts. But
Okay.
if I didn't, I amend the answer.
Fine. 1 hour per shift. Is that what you mean?
Approximately, yes.
Objection. Counsel, that's not what you just said.
You just agreed with me, counsel.
It's not.
And that dust came only from one machine at the plant, namely the picker machine. Isn't that right?
Objection.
The dust to which I refer, it would be the case.
And that all the other dust in the plant was sucked away by an exhaust system. Isn't that right?
A majority of it was, yes.
What was left was only a very minor amount of dust. Isn't that right?
I would so characterize it.
And the plant was kept clean, was cleaned after every shift. Isn't that right?
I believe that's correct.
And even while the shift was going on, that plant was a relatively clean operation. Isn't that right?
I would say so.
And you, other than when the mixing and picking machine was operating, you couldn't see visible dust in that plant. Isn't that right?
That requires a pretty sharp memory, yeah. That's my impression.
And the men all wore respirators while they were working on making the filter media. Isn't that right?
In the mixing picking room, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's your testimony that every precaution that could have been found at that time was taken by Hollingsworth and Vose and Specialties at those plants. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I didn't do an exhaustive study on that matter, but we implemented all the recommendations that were made by the state hygiene people.
And despite all the precautions that you've described, the company that you worked for all those years now faces many lawsuits filed by people who made that filter media who have gotten sick or died from asbestos-related disease. Isn't that your understanding, Dr. Knudson?
Objection.
Objection.
I really don't have any knowledge particularly about that.
Well, Dr. Knudson, when you testified in 1985, it was with regard to a lawsuit against Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Yes, it was.
And the lawsuit was filed by a man who had worked in the West Groton plant making cigarette filter media out of blue asbestos. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I believe it is.
And the man or his widow were claiming that as a result of the work on your invention, he had gotten sick from the asbestos. Isn't that right?
Objection.
have that impression.
And you further have the impression, doctor, that that's not the only worker who claims to have gotten sick from being exposed to the asbestos that was used to manufacture your invention. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I believe that's true.
Now, doctor, yesterday you testified and appeared to be familiar with the term mesothelioma. Isn't that so? You've heard that term before.
Objection.
As of this date, I've heard it, yes.
Do you know how many cases of mesothelioma have come out of the West Groton plant?
I don't have any idea.
You know that there are some, don't you?
I don't know if there are any.
Objection.
You know that there have been a number of men, however, who have died and whose estates have claimed that they died as a result of being exposed to the blue asbestos used in the manufacture of the micronite filter media. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I'm not specifically informed about those matters, no.
Have you ever taken the time to look into the question of how many workers got sick as a result of working in that particular plant, making your invention?
Objection. Counsel, that's the third time you've asked the question.
This is a different question.
At this point, it becomes badgering.
This is a different question, counsel.
I have made no specific effort to look into that information.
And you are currently a stockholder of Hollingsworth and Vose Corporation, isn't that right?
That is correct.
Answered. Objection.
Has the subject of these asbestos-related lawsuits against Hollingsworth and Vose ever come up at any meetings of the stockholders of Hollingsworth and Vose?
Objection.
Objection.
I don't recall that that's the case.
Doctor, do you know a couple by the name of Ray and Clara Simzak?
I do not.
Do you know a husband and wife by the name of Pete and Angela Iardi?
I do not.
Do you know any of the clients that I represent who have brought claims against Hollingsworth and Vose or Lorillard arising out of the micronite filter media?
Objection.
Objection.
I'm not aware of your clients.
Well, Doctor, I've had an exhibit marked P11 that I've provided to counsel, and I'd like to provide a copy to you. I believe I provided you with the next one, Mr. McElhenney, but fortunately I have one here if you don't have one handy.
No, you didn't provide me with an
Here's
extra
that one for the
so it
witness.
is indeed fortunate. We should make sure it's the same.
Doctor, I show you, you are now looking at a document marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 11. Doctor, would you look at the second page, and I ask you if you recognize the signature on that page?
That is not my signature.
Is it the signature of your secretary?
I would believe it might be.
Because that is the way you were, she would be instructed to sign your name if she was signing for you?
Yes.
And so, in that situation, you would presume that the letter was dictated by you but signed by her?
Objection.
I would think that would be true.
And this is a letter dated January 4th, 1956 to Harris Parmalee. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Doctor, have you ever seen this letter within the last year?
I have not.
Doctor, this letter talks about information that is needed in order to prosecute your patent application. Isn't that correct?
I haven't read it yet, so I don't know.
Doesn't the first sentence of the letter say, in connection with the further prosecution of our patent application, with numbers, our attorney, the attorney given, has indicated it might be helpful to supply the examiner with information relating to the development and, quote, commercial success, unquote, of the product, which of course is Kent cigarettes. That's what it says. In your letter?
Yes.
And 3 pieces of information are requested. An outline of the history of development, correct?
Yes.
The cost of research and development work?
Yes.
And the extent of commercial success in terms of the number of cigarettes sold so far embodying the filter. Is that the 3rd item?
That's what it says.
Now, I don't see anything here specifically concerning the history of the development. But in the bottom paragraph on the first page, you request certain information from Lorillard about the people who've done research on the filter. Isn't that right?
I'll have to read it first.
Well, you please go ahead and do that. I'd like to go off the video record so we don't waste tape. Counsel for Hollingsworth and Vose declines.
Question again, please.
In your letter, you ask Lorillard to provide with you more details about the research and development they had done with regard to this filter. Isn't that so?
The costs, yes.
Well, you ask them for the work done by Dr. Fishbein, don't you?
Objection. Are you trying to paraphrase, counsel?
No, I'm not trying to paraphrase, counsel. One of the things you ask Lorillard for is information concerning the work by Dr. Fishbein. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
So at the time you wrote the letter, I presume that you knew who Dr. Fishbein was. Isn't that right?
At that time, I apparently did.
And you ask about work that Lorillard did at the Armour Institute. Isn't that right?
Objection. Counsel, I'm just not able to follow you. Can you point out to me where
it's 4 lines up from the bottom of the first page, counsel. You ask them for information about the work done at the Armour Institute with respect to cost. Isn't that right?
In my copy, that's stricken out.
Okay. I will advise you, I will advise you, Dr. Knudson, that this document that you're looking at is exactly the way it was produced to me by Lorillard. And I have certain questions I'm going to ask you about the handwritten notations on this document. But for the moment, I'm just asking you about the typewritten portion, which is, I presume, what you wrote. Doctor, you also ask Lorillard for, quote, the work on the electron photomicrographs. Isn't that right?
The cost, yes.
Doctor, do you know who did work for Lorillard on electron photomicrographs?
The only one I know is the gentleman from Schenectady.
That's Dr. Fulham?
I believe it is.
You notice that the word Fulham and a number is written in somebody's handwriting at the bottom of that page?
Yes.
And immediately above that is the word Revere with the number 25,000 written next to it.
It isn't very clear, but that seems like what it is.
So when you wrote the word electron photomicrographs, the only thing that you think you could have been referring to was Dr. Fulham's work. Isn't that right?
As I remember it, that's correct.
And, Doctor, with the knowledge that this came from Lorillard's files, would it be fair to assume that what is written here on the bottom is the information you requested, which is to say cost, that was later communicated to you by telephone?
Objection. Counsel,
I wouldn't
please.
like to speculate on that. I don't know, I don't recognize those numbers. This letter wasn't returned to me with those data on it that I remember.
Well, let me ask you a little bit further on that, Doctor. You asked for the cost of the work done by Dr. Fishbein, don't you?
Objection.
In your letter?
It would so appear.
And if you look at the handwritten notes at the bottom of the letter, doesn't the word Fishbein appear, and below it the number 75,000?
It isn't legible in my copy.
The number isn't legible, or the name?
The name is partly legible, but the number isn't.
The name does look like Fishbein, doesn't it?
I'm going to check in any event on the ground that the notations as of this point are hearsay.
Do you see what you believe is the word Fishbein in handwriting at the bottom of that page?
I do see that.
And when you sent this letter to Dr. Parmalee, didn't he or somebody at Lorillard provide you with the information you needed so you could get your patent?
I don't have any memory of this incident.
Well, Doctor, we know you got the patent, right?
Objection.
It issued, yes.
And in this letter, you're telling Dr. Parmalee that your lawyer needs certain information from Lorillard. Isn't that right?
Objection. Can I have a continuing objection?
Yes, you have a continuing objection.
It would appear so.
And since you got the patent, is it a fair conclusion that you actually ultimately received the information you needed from Lorillard?
It's not an automatic assumption, no.
All right. Well, please turn to the second page of that letter. In the second page of that letter, don't you tell Dr. Parmalee that you estimate from the sales that you've made at Hollingsworth and Vose to Lorillard that Lorillard has sold approximately 10 billion Kent cigarettes to date?
I can't confirm that.
Is that what's in the letter under your signature?
Yes, it is.
And that's as of January 1956, right?
Yes.
Kent kept selling cigarettes for another 5-6 months or so with this particular filter after that date. Isn't that right?
I don't know.
You don't know when they stopped selling
I don't know when they stopped selling.
I will advise you that according to the answers that were given to interrogatories that I posed to Lorillard, that they said it was in May of 1956. So if my assumption is correct, they sold another 5 months' worth of Kent cigarettes after the date of this letter. Isn't that so, Doctor?
Objection.
Well, I can't confirm that. I don't know any basis for it, except what you state.
Well, certainly, if you were going to give some factual information or even an estimate to Dr. Parmalee at Lorillard, you would want to take care to be sure that what you told him was accurate. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Well, I would try to make it accurate, yes.
So that figure of 10 billion Kent cigarettes as of January 1956 would have been a number that you would have calculated with care before providing it to your client, Lorillard. Isn't that right?
I can't confirm that. I don't know the basis of the calculation.
Doctor, that figure of 10 billion cigarettes relates to point 3 on the first page of the letter with regard to the issue of commercial success. Isn't that right?
I would assume there's some relationship, yes.
And from 1952 to at the point where you wrote this letter, you wanted to prove to the patent office that your patent was a commercial success. Isn't that right?
I don't remember that detail, but it's possible.
Well, point 3 in the letter says the extent of commercial success in terms of the number of cigarettes sold so far embodying the filter. That's what you said, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And one of your goals in manufacturing the filter, one of your goals in manufacturing the filter media for Hollingsworth and Vose was to achieve commercial success. Isn't that right?
You mean for Lorillard?
I mean for Hollingsworth and Vose.
State it again, please.
You wanted, by manufacturing the filter media, you wanted to achieve commercial success for Hollingsworth and Vose, right?
I would have to assume that. I don't have a specific memory of this.
And were you hopeful that Lorillard would be commercially successful with Kent?
Yes.
Doctor, wasn't that really your only goal when you were manufacturing the filter media, was commercial success?
Objection.
That's an open question. I would like to have a further explanation of what you mean by that.
All right,
My
Doctor.
only goal?
That's what I'm asking you. Was it your only goal?
I don't remember the situation well enough to answer.
Well, Doctor, was it your goal, Doctor, to make a filter media that was safe to the people who would be smoking the cigarettes that contained the filter media that you made?
Objection.
Did you say objective or goal?
My question was goal.
Well, I have to say I don't know. I don't know that there was a goal as such.
Did that issue ever cross your mind during the years that you were working at Specialties?
Objection.
What issue?
Yes, tell me what issue you're referring to now.
The issue of making a filter media that would be safe for the people who would be smoking the cigarettes that contained the filter media.
Yes. Yes.
That issue did cross your mind?
Oh, I think it did.
Well, you know, Doctor, yesterday I asked you that identical question at page 108 of your deposition. Did that issue ever cross your mind during the years that you were working at Specialties? And the previous question was exactly the same. And your answer was, I don't remember that it did.
Objection.
Now, have you remembered something more today that you didn't remember yesterday?
Objection.
I must have misspoke. I still don't remember, and I think I used that term.
You still don't remember that the issue of making the filter media safe for the people who'd be smoking the cigarettes ever crossed your mind, right?
Objection.
I don't have a memory
where are you in the
to that extent.
107, 108.
Okay.
Doctor, in 1957, Lorillard dropped your company as its supplier for filter media. Isn't that right?
I don't have that date in mind.
Which date do you have in mind?
I don't have any date in mind.
Well, at some point they dropped you. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And I will represent to you that based on the legal documents that I have seen, that Specialties went out of business at the end of 1957. Does that sound correct?
Objection. What sound correct? Your representation?
That the date was correct, that the date was the end of December 1957.
Counsel, you know, there's a proper way to conduct an examination.
I just don't remember.
But at some point, Specialties merged back into Hollingsworth and Vose. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Objection.
And that was at some point after Lorillard had dropped Hollingsworth and Vose as its supplier of filter media. Isn't that right?
Objection.
I believe that's approximately correct.
Now, Doctor, after Lorillard had dropped Hollingsworth and Vose and Specialties as their suppliers, you continued to be interested in marketing the blue asbestos filter media to cigarette companies. Isn't that right?
Objection.
To my knowledge, we never marketed any to the cigarette companies.
But you tried. Isn't that right?
You want me to recall an incident when we tried?
Well, let me help you, Doctor. Would you look...
Doctor,
do you have a recollection, Doctor?
Let me tell you, Doctor, you have a right to complete your answer, and you should not let Mr. Johnson interrupt your answer. And I would ask Mr. Johnson not to interrupt the witness's answer.
I certainly didn't intend to, counsel, and I apologize to the witness if I did so inadvertently. Doctor, did you have anything you wish to add?
Why don't we repeat the question? Start again.
No.
Doctor, after you lost the Lorillard account, did you continue to pursue the issue of using a blue asbestos filter on a cigarette?
I would not call it pursuing the issue.
All right. Well, would you look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 10, which you were shown for the first time this morning? Doctor, do you have that in front of you now?
I do.
You were shown that this morning?
Objection.
I don't remember having read it this morning. Maybe I was...
All right, Doctor, let me see if I can make it easier for you. That is entitled a trip report, and it's a memorandum to you. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And if you look at the last page, it's the signature is typed in as Stanley J. Pasternak, Development Engineer. Isn't that right?
His initials are there, yes.
For Specialties Corporation. Right?
I can't confirm that.
Well, it's signed, very truly yours, H&V Specialties Company, Stanley J. Pasternak, Development Engineer. Isn't that so, Doctor?
That is true. I didn't notice that.
And it's sent to H.W. Knudson. Isn't that right?
Yes.
That's you.
Correct.
And it's dated July 26, 1957. Correct?
Yes.
Now, by that time, you were no longer in business with Lorillard. Isn't that right? You were no longer... Lorillard was no longer your customer, isn't that right?
That's my impression.
Okay, now, take a look at page 2, near the bottom of the page, with the reference date July 18th, 1957. Do you have that place, Doctor?
My copy only references July 18th.
Thank you. That refers to a visit by Mr. Pasternak to Dr. Ernst Winder at the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York City. Isn't that right?
Objection.
It would so appear.
And Mr. Pasternak reported to you during that period. Isn't that right?
I don't believe that's the case.
Well, in this case, the memorandum went to you.
Yes,
isn't that right?
I just don't remember, so I'll have to plead ignorance.
All right. Mr. Pasternak describes Dr. Winder as one of the nation's authorities on the subject of tobacco smoking and lung cancer. Isn't that right?
Well, I wasn't very familiar with the man, so I can't...
Well, isn't that what Mr. Pasternak wrote in his memo to you?
Exactly.
And if you look over to the top of the next page in the discussion about what the conversation was with Dr. Winder, Mr. Pasternak's report to you is that according to Dr. Winder, asbestos was considered undesirable because it could dust out and enter the lungs. Isn't that what Mr. Pasternak reported to you?
Objection.
That's what's reported here, yes.
Yeah, Counsel, just so you don't misstate on the record, perhaps you could read the actual sentence that you just attempted to paraphrase.
You are free to ask whatever you want on redirect,
Is
counsel.
there some reason why you don't want the record to accurately reflect the statement in the document?
The record does accurately reflect it, and I wish to proceed with my cross-examination.
Do you decline my request
I
that you
decline
read
your
the
request.
words and not go on your paraphrase?
I decline your request.
Excuse me, we need to change videotape.
I'm ready to go, but if you want to break, break. I think that I shouldn't take much longer than about 20 minutes.